If you die, I'll kill your sister too. Those weren't the words of a madman in a back alley. They came from a doctor, a scientist so consumed by his obsession that he crossed every boundary of humanity. If you were a twin in Auschwitz, you were a body to be broken, a question to be answered through pain. Under the cold, calculated gaze of Dr. Joseph Mengele, hundreds of children were subjected to horrors beyond imagination. This is the true story of how innocent children were turned into test subjects, and why some begged not to survive. We'll hear from the ones who lived through it and chose to speak. During World War II, the Nazis believed they could engineer the perfect human, a so-called master race, and to do that, they turned to science. Twisted, horrific science. At the center of it all was a man named Joseph Mengele, a doctor with a charming smile and a clipboard, and a reputation that earned him a terrifying nickname, the Angel of Death. Stationed at Auschwitz, Mengele became obsessed with twins. He saw them not as children, but as matching test subjects, living tools in his quest to unlock the secrets of heredity. He would walk down the arrival line at the camp, calmly asking mothers one question: are they twins? If the answer was yes, he smiled. That meant they'd be spared from the gas chamber, but not from him. Inside his lab, what Mengele called research was something else entirely. He would inject strange substances into their eyes, claiming he wanted to study pigmentation. Some woke up with permanent blindness, others didn't wake up at all. He'd deliberately infect one twin with a deadly disease, just to watch the other die with them. And in his most disturbing experiment, he tried to physically stitch two children together, to see if he could create conjoined twins. He wrote everything down, every cut, every scream, every slow death, meticulously recorded like data on a spreadsheet. So, let's enter the part of this story that's hard to hear, but impossible to forget. When twins arrived at Auschwitz, they were separated from the main group. Most prisoners feared the gas chambers, but for twins, the terror was slower, colder, and in many ways, even more cruel. They were sent to Block 10, the medical wing, where Joseph Mengele was waiting. Clipboard in hand, smiling politely. He was calm, even charming, and that made what happened next all the more disturbing. To most people, twins are a miracle, rare, mysterious, and deeply connected, but to the Nazis, twins were the perfect test. Mengele believed that by studying twins, he could unlock what made people the same, what made them different, and more importantly, how to control it. He thought that buried in their matching DNA was the blueprint for something far more sinister: how to create the so-called perfect Aryan child. It began with measurements, everyday, endless measurements: head circumference, eye color, length of arms, legs, fingers, even how far their noses stuck out. It wasn't science, it was obsession. But then, the needles came out. Twins were lined up like lab animals, sleeves rolled up, eyes wide with confusion. Nurses, some silent, some trembling, injected them with thick, discolored fluids. Sometimes it was a yellow liquid. Other times it was dark, almost black. None of them were told what it was, they just knew it burned. Instantly. Some screamed, some fainted, some simply stared, too terrified to react. One girl later said it felt like fire moving through her veins. Mengele watched calmly, jotting notes in his leather-bound book, as if he were adjusting the temperature on a lab experiment instead of tormenting a 10-year-old. There was no anesthesia, no comfort, just pain, and the horrifying knowledge that death might be the only escape. Eva Moses was just 10 years old when she and her identical twin sister Miriam stepped off the cattle car at Auschwitz. They had been crammed in with other prisoners for days. No food, no water, no idea where they were going. When the doors finally opened, they were met with shouting, barking dogs, and the thick smoke of burning bodies. A Nazi officer stopped them. "Twins?" he asked. Their mother hesitated. She knew something was wrong, but she also knew the truth. "Yes," she said. That single word sealed their fate. It pulled them out of the line headed to the gas chambers and straight into the hands of Joseph Mengele. Every morning before sunrise, they were ripped from their wooden bunks. No breakfast, no rest, just endless examinations and measurements. Blood was drawn constantly from both arms until Eva's veins collapsed. She grew weaker with each session, her body fading while Mengele scribbled notes. But one day, it got worse. A nurse injected Eva with something. She never found out what it was. Hours later, she collapsed with a fever so intense she was hallucinating. Her limbs swelled. Her skin turned yellow. She drifted in and out of consciousness, certain she was dying. She begged for help. None came. For 2 weeks, she lay in the infirmary, untreated, trembling on a wooden plank surrounded by other children too weak to cry. One morning, Mengele appeared at her bedside, glanced down coldly and said something like, "If you die, I'll kill your sister too." Meanwhile, Miriam was kept in the barracks, not knowing if her twin was dead or alive. She was forced to endure experiments alone, injections, blood extractions, unknown pills. No explanations, no anesthesia. She saw other twins around her vanish daily. Some were dragged out of the bunks and never returned. Others came back bleeding, covered in boils, or visibly disoriented, and then quietly died days later. Eventually, Eva recovered, barely. But something had changed. Her body was never the same. Her strength never fully returned. Miriam's kidneys stopped growing altogether, and later in life, she would suffer kidney failure, believed to be the result of the injections she received during those experiments. The two sisters survived, but not because Mengele cared. He once called them his special twins, not out of affection, but because they were useful. They were tools, data points, subjects in a nightmare masked as science. But Eva and Miriam weren't the only ones. Vera Kriegel and her twin sister Olga were just 5 years old when they were taken from their village in Czechoslovakia and loaded onto a cattle car so tightly packed that even the dead were left standing. When they finally arrived at Auschwitz, Vera recalls stepping down from the train onto what felt like human steps, the bodies of those who had died during the journey. They were sorted immediately, the weak to be killed, the strong to work, and then the twins for Mengele. Of course, Mengele noticed Vera and Olga. He was especially intrigued by the mother's so-called perfect Aryan features. Blue eyes, sharp nose, but the girls had brown eyes. That contrast interested him, so he selected them. Vera remembers being ushered into a sterile room and suddenly staring at an entire wall of human eyes, preserved in jars. Brown, blue, green. She said it was like a collection of butterflies, but far more disturbing. These eyes, she said, were staring at me. She collapsed to the floor in shock. Their first experiment involved being locked in a small wooden cage together and given repeated injections in the back, the purpose never explained. Vera believed it may have been an attempt to change their eye color. Later, they and more than 100 other twins were injected with bacteria that causes noma, a flesh-eating disease that often begins in the mouth and spreads rapidly. Vera said some children developed painful boils. Some went feverish. Some just didn't wake up the next day. Mengele never seemed to care. In fact, he grew angry when twins disappeared, not because they were dead, but because he had lost a subject. Once, when a pair went missing, Vera stared him down defiantly, refusing to let him see her fear. Jonah Lax, another survivor, was almost sent to the gas chamber until her sister shouted out, "We're twins." Mengele stopped the execution and had her brought to the lab instead. Later, Jonah would recall seeing people's organs removed without anesthesia and said that if one twin died, the other was almost always killed so the bodies could be dissected and compared. According to researchers, Mengele had access to over 700 pairs of twins at Auschwitz. Eva, Miriam, Vera, Olga, and Jonah survived, but they were among the lucky few. Out of the estimated 1,500 sets of twins experimented on by Joseph Mengele, only around 200 survived. After the camp was liberated, the sisters were reunited with what remained of their family, which, tragically, was nothing. Their parents, their older sisters, all gone. The only reason they were alive was because Mengele found them useful. In the years that followed, the pain didn't stop. It just changed shape. Miriam suffered from severe kidney issues for most of her life, a result of the experiments. No doctor could fully explain what had been done to her because no legitimate medical records existed. She died in 1993 from complications related to those injuries. Eva, on the other hand, carried the scars in her mind. She suffered from nightmares, flashbacks, guilt. She once described it as a war that never ended. But instead of letting it break her, she did something extraordinary. She chose to speak. In 1984, Eva founded the Candles Holocaust Museum and Education Center in Indiana. Candles stood for Children of Auschwitz Nazi Deadly Lab Experiments Survivors. It became her mission to locate every surviving twin who had endured Mengele's experiments and give them a voice. She believed that remembering wasn't enough. People had to understand, to feel, to know what happened. But in 1995, Eva Moses Kaur did something that shocked the world. At a public event in Boston, standing on stage beside a former Nazi doctor, she forgave Josef Mengele. Not because he deserved it, but because, she said, "I refuse to remain a victim. I want to heal." Some people called her brave. Others called it betrayal. Survivors and scholars debated her decision for years, but Eva never backed down. On the other hand, Vera said she and her sister didn't talk about what happened for years. Not because they forgot, but because the memories were too heavy to carry out loud. She suffered from chronic pain, nightmares, and the kind of silence that only trauma can create. But eventually, Vera also decided to speak, to bear witness, to make sure the world knew what Mengele had done. Not to soldiers, not to enemies, but to children. Vera's voice became a weapon, not of revenge, but of remembrance. She lived to make sure that what she saw behind the doors of Block 10 would never be forgotten. After the war, these atrocities shocked the world and led directly to the Nuremberg trials. Out of this horror came a new understanding. Medical experiments demand strict ethics, voluntary consent, and respect for human dignity. The Nuremberg Code was born, a set of ethical principles demanding informed consent, voluntary participation, and above all, respect for human life and dignity. It became the foundation of modern bioethics. What Mengele called research was really torture, but the voices of survivors, like Eva, Miriam, Vera, and so many others, ensured that the truth wouldn't die with them. They were meant to be erased. Instead, they became the reason the world said, "Never again." Thank you for watching. If you want more true stories that are darker, stranger, and more chilling than any horror movie, hit subscribe, and I'll see you already in the next one.